Okay, this is our second part of our behaviors unit, loosely aligned with chapter 6 in our book that we have. First topic is political socialization. How do you become politicized, whether you be liberal, conservative, very active, not active, you're a libertarian, all these different things. So how do you have it? Please make sure in this next slide that you'll notice there are three. These are the three. You may have other opinions, but your opinion doesn't matter on this case. The number one, and by far the biggest thing, is your family. That is the biggest influence that you have. Media has an influence, not as large. The school does too, but those are the top three reasons. Now you may say, now my family isn't as important as my friends. Well, the reason why that is stated. Until you are in the later years of your high school, you really didn't choose your friends as much because activities you were involved in were ones that your parents had. Where you lived was because your parents picked out some people that lived around you. Where, if you went to church or not, was not chosen by you. What church you went to, a lot of those things that you had. Your race wasn't picked by you in here. So that's why it is family more than what you have for your friends in here. Your ideology, that is where you lean. We normally think liberal, conservative, centrist on there, but your personal beliefs about what you believe in and when it comes to politics there. Here's where to think about how the influences of family, school, media affect political ideology. So this is where you may be more liberal, think on there, and more than likely the vast majority of you, if you are more liberal, your parents were, and your family was. There again, not everybody, but the vast majority that we have. All right, political culture. There's a lot of things that we value in society overall, and it doesn't matter whether liberal or conservative. There's different viewpoints with it, but things like liberty. We go back to the first unit that we had, and the democratic ideas that we have, and the ideas of equality. Everybody is equal. Some of these things, the United States, we value more. Individual responsibility, our freedoms are two things that we are stronger on than a lot of other industrialized countries around the world. So. Okay, where you live affects a lot more. Now, I have a bunch of things on here. Some of these were more in the past. Today, probably the biggest is urban versus rural. And you will notice on this map, and you're going to see a lot of maps in this section, and there you're probably going to need to pause and zoom in on some of these things there. But the red is the areas that are Republican, the blue are Democrat, the darker red is deeper Republican, darker blue, that way. And as we look at things, this is where the number one thing today that you can tell is urban versus rural there. Rural areas are very Republican, urban areas very Democratic, and even when you look at the suburbs, the closer they are to the city, the more Democratic, the further out they are, the more Republican there. East, west, north, south, Rust Belt, Sun Belt used to be more in the past. Like for east, west, there we now kind of have our coastal areas. You can kind of divide the West up. A more liberal area with California, Oregon, Washington, very more conservative with the Great Plains. The mountain areas are a lot of times seen as conservative, but a lot of times it's libertarian ideas, more of your classic conservative that you have. For flyover country, this is where a lot of times we look and we see that the Democratic strongholds are on the West Coast and then also on the East Coast, a little bit around the Great Lakes. So that area in between is the flyover. Bubble land versus bubble land. Mike Huckabee wrote a book saying that people that are living in the cities are living in this bubble land. And they don't understand what people living in the flyover country, where he's from Arkansas, a person in New York City doesn't understand what a person in Arkansas has. Jon Stewart, when he interviewed him, pointed out, he's like, yeah, but you can also reverse it. Does the person living in Arkansas understand the differences that a person in New York City has? And that's where we can kind of see, in the parties end up gearing a lot of policies towards where their support comes. The North and the South, that is changing a lot today as areas like North Carolina and Virginia are becoming more purple. Even Georgia and Texas are. Florida, we already were more purple even though you see a lot of Republicans, but we'll see soon that where I do some Florida maps, that we are definitely a purple state there. Rust Belt, Sun Belt was also more in the past. Okay, if you look at this map, you will see then this is a county by county map. You look at this, and I'm not sure which election this was. I think it was 2012 election for this one, or early 2000s election there. But most things really haven't changed a whole lot for county. But you will see it looks like the United States is predominantly red or Republican. But this distorted map is actually much better, because once you account for population, like even in Florida, where you see Florida's population is bigger, we're third largest state, where we're mainly red on this map, half of Floridians live right down in that small corner there in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. And that area is predominantly Democrat. Meanwhile, the Panhandle area that has a lot smaller population is predominantly Republican. Here's where you can see for Florida where it's actually even a few key areas when you compare the 2012 map with the 2016 map. Both times Republicans and Democrats for a statewide vote within 1%. But what changed in there? And there's just small areas. Probably the largest populated area would be St. Lucie County, which in 2012 voted for Obama, but in 2016 voted for Trump. Some northern counties there, which are small population but high African American population, rural counties. A lot of African Americans that voted in 2012 did not show up to vote, so like Little Jefferson County changed. One bigger county, also Pinellas County. But for the most part, you will notice that it's still pretty much the same map overall for Florida. And we look at the nationwide, you will see that these are all maps from basically the 2000s. We have the same general areas. Now for Florida, we are definitely the biggest swing state, sometimes blue, sometimes red, that you have this. Ohio being another of the big swing states. Here we go back even into 1944, which even in 44 you'll notice that the Deep South is Democrat, but we will have over time it shift to become heavily Republican on there. You notice a couple of years in there like 1948, 1968, where we have the third party influence, whether it be the Dixiecrats or the American Independents there. So, but overall you can see that except for the changes that we had in the South that for the last couple decades it's been pretty consistent. Okay, this is something the book has a little bit about that's actually really important, especially when we look at trends. Usually when people hear gender gap, they think income, but for politics. Now, studies have shown that usually men educate themselves, are more involved when it comes to politics, but women are more likely to vote there. And this is becoming a bigger and bigger trend the younger that you have there. Currently, the most likely segment of the population to vote is older white men. But if we look 2 decades out, more than likely the most likely people to vote will be educated, college educated women there. So this is where we kind of look and see. And if you are Republicans, you have to worry about this because college-educated women in their 20s and their 30s are right now, I saw one poll recently show that they're like 72% to be leaning Democrat and only about 15% Republican, and that small percentage otherwise independent. So if you look at trends for the future, one thing Republicans have to look at is how do you then have more women that get involved there. 2016 election really didn't change this pattern there. I mean, it's in 2012 the Republicans said that they needed to do more for women, and this is where when we get to interest groups, you're going to see this one interest group called Emily's List, which helps fund women candidates. And the 2018 election was one that showed as we had a large number of women that actually had got their start from Emily's List. Okay, political participation in here, where people are involved in there. The most common thing is voting, and the most common time to vote is in a presidential election, even if we have a huge amount of people vote in the 2020 election, it will probably still only be about 60% of the population voting that can there. Now, for the participation, you have to know the difference. What's the difference between conventional and non-conventional? Conventional ways, again, the most likely is voting, but you may also write letters to people that are running for office, or you write a letter to the newspaper there, or you make a blog there, or you run for office yourself, you work on petitions, you work on a campaign, even just trying to convince someone else, putting a sign in your yard or a sticker on your vehicle. Those are conventional things. And here, I'm not sure where I got this from, but where they were talking about like spectator activities, transitional activities, gladiator activities. So pretty much the more involved that you get with conventional participation. Unconventional participation, we're going to see in a second, are things that you may not think, but it does get attention. All right, grassroots. This is a phrase you're going to see a lot in different areas of campaigning and in politics. Now, grassroots is supposed to be, you think, starting from the bottom, starting from your local town, local issue. Someone found an issue and they started from the bottom and worked up. It's not coming from Washington, D.C. down in here. So this is where some of the things that we have had recently are some of the environmental issues, even the Tea Party before that we had. One thing that you're going to find with grassroots, and we're going to have some things that are going to politicians will try to make something look like it was from the normal people, but it was actually more structured on there. All right, the unconventional participation here. Protests, civil disobedience, violence. We have seen some of that in the last year or two. And here, why is it used? It works. Sometimes if you feel like you've been ignored, and this is where where in U.S. history you studied about in the late 1960s where the civil rights turned more violent, but it called attention to some of the problems that they had. Black Lives Matters there, even though there's a lot of peaceful protests, sometimes it's not until something violent happens that some people will go and take notice. Here's the key thing, that is, if there's too much sometimes, then you will actually turn people against what your cause is. Okay, looking for some of these questions. Tea Party movement, and then Make America Great Again. Were these grassroots effort? Some people will point to some ideas that there are, but some of it was, again, structured to make it look that way there. But this is where you can actually write in both ways and point out to it. What's an issue that you maybe feel that you could actually have for a grassroots? In this area, a lot of times it's environmental type of things that we have. Okay, this question, 2003 in here, but this is where you would kind of see it here. Citizens often choose to participate in the political process in ways other than voting. Identify 2 forms of participation in the political process other than voting. Explain 2 advantages for each form of participation you identified in A. So again, you take some of that knowledge that we have, and you're going to write and add more to things. This is where we'll also connect a lot of this to our linkage institutions. You want the media to take a notice, or political parties to take up your issue in their platform.